Hi, this is Frank Strosho with another episode of Stories Best Told in the Dark. A couple of things. It's been a while since I've done one of these. As I said in one of my previous episodes, I had pneumonia and COVID, and I was kind of down for the count for a while, even though I tried to do some of this. But I feel pretty good now. So I was away for a couple of days at a very interesting seminar. It was put on by the New England Society for Psychic Research. And they had a VIP party on Friday, October 28th, which my daughter Melissa and I went to. And then the Warrens Seekers of the Supernatural Paracon 2020 was held the next day on Saturday, October 29th. What was interesting about this was the VIP party the night before and the Paracon the day after included objects from Ed and Lorraine Warren's occult museum in Connecticut. And some of the objects that were there, you wouldn't think they would have there because they were so dangerous. For instance, the Annabelle doll was there. Now, this Raggedy Ann doll was believed to have been possessed by a young girl whose name was Annabelle. After the owner of this Raggedy Ann doll experienced a lot of really bad, sinister and dangerous types of activities, Ed Warren determined that the doll was possessed by a demon, or the demonic, I should say, and it was brought back to Ed Warren's museum for safekeeping. Annabelle was responsible in one case for 7 psychic scratches across a person. A psychic scratch is one that you feel the pain, you remove your clothing, and you've got deep scratches or welts across your body. So Annabelle did that to one person. There was another person that visited the museum and kind of taunted Annabelle, said some nasty things to the doll, and on the way home had a motorcycle accident and was killed. So it was there's quite a lot of story behind Annabelle if you read the actual story of what happened with that doll from the moment the two nurses, the 2 students, received the doll to when Ed Warren got it home. It's quite amazing the things that occurred with this doll. Also, the doll that was used in the movie. There's a couple of Annabelle movies. I don't remember exactly what the names were, but that doll was also there. Additionally, there was a mirror called the Conjuring Mirror that was used in a psychomantium in an attempt to reach out to some lost dead ones. And the guy who was doing this, he started getting really strange. He almost went insane, basically, from using this mirror, from the things that he was seeing in the mirror. So Ed Warren took that away and put that in his museum, but that actual mirror was there for us to view and get fairly close to. There was a shadow doll there. The shadow doll was another very possessed object, and it was used to, basically, the shadow doll was used to curse a person. It was made from a number of objects like animal bones, feathers, a human tooth, and these were used to curse a particular person. And there's a whole story behind the shadow doll. There was a satanic ritual skull there. This is an actual authentic human skull that was used by satanic cults. And they used it to practice black magic and to basically sacrifice their souls to Satan. And they did this because of the promise of gaining power. All right? So they fell for that. If I do this, I'll get all kinds of money and power and whatever else I want. They also had this satanic idol. I mean, there were only 2 objects. Of all the objects from the Warrens Museum, there are only 2 objects that really bothered me. I feel things. I don't see dead people and stuff like that, like you hear some of these people on TV, and I don't doubt they do, but that's not me. But I do feel things, and there was a couple of items. One was the Annabelle doll, but even worse than that was this satanic idol. The satanic idol was handmade, and it was made by a high-ranking Satanist priest, and it was used to perform rituals. It was found located in the woods of Sandy Hook, Connecticut, by a guy who was out there hunting. This satanic idol is bad news, let me tell you, because I got within 6 or 8 feet of this. Before I even noticed it was there, my skin started to crawl. And my daughter got these hot flashes going through her body. She's pretty sensitive to these things too. So that was there. They had they call a New England witch doll. It was just a doll made in the image of someone used to curse them. Then a real interesting one was this toy dinosaur. I think there was a movie made about this too. I'm not sure, but it's a toy dinosaur that was possessed by the demonic. And it would run across the floor and it would speak. And one day it possessed a little boy, the boy who had this dinosaur. It ended up possessing this little boy. And it said once, "You're all going to die. I'm going to kill everyone," or something like that. And Ani Johnson, you've probably heard that name before, taunted this demon and basically challenged the demon to leave the boy and enter him. So it did. I mean, it's the one thing, you never do. You never challenge a demon. You're not stronger than they are, no matter what. So later there was a case in court where Ani, after becoming possessed, actually, I believe he murdered someone and actually got convicted and went to jail for that. I may possibly be wrong, but that's the impression I got. I did get to talk to Ani a little bit. He was there, but there were so many people around him. I just got a picture taken with him and a few words, and that was it. There was a movie that came out called The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. And he used the defense of being possessed. The Catholic Church backed him up on that, and so did Ed and Lorraine Warren, but the courts could not accept a plea of demonic possession. Otherwise, every single murder after that would be, they'd use the same, I'm going to say excuse, although in this case it was a reason. So as far as I understand, he did jail time and then eventually got out. There was also a statue of Goody Bassett, and Goody Bassett was the witch of Stratford. Goody was found guilty of witchcraft, and she was hung in 1651, I think. And some 40 years or so after that is when the Salem witch trials began, so it was a long time ago. There were a few other things there too, like a fire doll, a child's coffin, a vampire coffin. So all of these objects are supposed to be tainted in some way, and if you touch them through a thing called transference, these demonic entities that are trapped in these objects can enter you. So all of these were roped off. There was an archbishop who was an exorcist who was there, who had blessed all of these objects and was instrumental in having them safely moved from the Warren Museum to the Mohegan Sun, actually, in Uncasville, Connecticut. So anyway, once I figure out and I buy the right software where I can start showing these things, sharing my screen with people, I took close-up pictures of all of these objects, and I've got some videos walking around showing all these objects, and pictures taken with certain well-known people in the psychic realm that I can also show. So I'll leave it at that, and when I get back to reviewing this this Paracon. I'll get into more details when I can share pictures and that. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was one of the items from my book, Stories Best Told in the Dark. This goes back to about 1955, 1956, in that time frame. I was only an infant. I mean, a young boy. I probably was maybe 2 years old, possibly a couple months older than that. I don't know. I know I was still in my crib at the time. So, maybe I was 1.5. I don't know. I know I was old enough to hobble around a little bit, and I was old enough to talk. So whatever age that is, I don't know. But I was still in my crib. But I could talk, like I said, and so it was in around that time frame. Okay, and my brother Joe, his bedroom was next to mine, and this house no longer exists, but this house had some things in it. So kind of like Ed Warren, when he was a child, he lived in a haunted house. This one was a little bit haunted as well, and you'll understand why in a few minutes. But my brother Joe used to have these nightmares every night where he had this monster that would come into his room and would come over his bed and descend upon him, and he would feel pain, and he'd feel like he couldn't breathe, and he called it the pins and needles monster. And we kind of grew up just talking about the pins and needles monster. Of course, everybody thought it was a dream. There was a period of time when my brother was around that time frame, actually, where he had been in the hospital for a while, and he had, IVs in his arms and needles in them. So everyone thought it was dreams he was having of that episode in the hospital. All kind of made sense, but he told me that this pins and needles monster, when it would come in his room and it would basically attack him, that it came out of my bedroom first. And I never really put two and two together till much later in life, that this thing would actually come in, stop and do some stuff to me, then it would leave and do some stuff to him. So this one particular night I remember very vividly. I was laying in my crib. I woke up, and of course it was dark, all the lights in the house were out, so my father and mother usually went to bed around 11 o'clock, no later than 11:30. Sometimes they would watch the 11 o'clock news and then go to bed. My father had to get up for work early the next morning and that, and anyone who has kids, back in those days, my father went to work every day, and my mother took care of us kids in the house and everything else. So even though she wasn't getting up for work, she was getting up for us. So they had to get up in the morning. So I knew that if my mother and father were in bed sleeping and all the lights were out, it was at least 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. In the corner of the room, the way my room was laid out, I had a crib, and against the back wall of the house was a window. And then if you went to the left, there was a bathroom coming off of my room. And then the door out of my room was behind me, which went right into my brother's room or the kitchen. So that night I'm laying there, and something starts to materialize in the right-hand corner of the room, just kind of in front of the window. And it was very, very black. So it wasn't just dark. It was like almost the absence of all matter. It was completely black, void of all light. And it had the shape of a man, a very tall, thin, lanky man, had what I think was some kind of fedora or hat that was black too, and long, long fingers. The arms seemed to be down almost below the knees. That's how long the arms were. And it stood in the corner of the room. And of course, it's weird because I don't actually remember being afraid of it at that point in time. I remember it coming towards my crib, but then turning and going into the adjacent bathroom. As it walked by, it kind of turned, and I just saw its eyes like almost like a shutter on a camera, opened and closed, and they were red, bright, bright red. And all of a sudden I got petrified. But it left my room and went into the bathroom. I found I couldn't move. I had a little white teething ring on the side of my crib, and I remember grabbing it and squeezing it and pulling it to rattle the crib. I think I was trying to get somebody's attention, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I heard water running in that bathroom. And then it came back out. It came out around the foot of my crib. And I also had I don't remember what I called it, but I had a big fluffy teddy bear. It had a wind-up key in the back, and it would play music to put me to sleep at night. And this thing came around the foot of the crib, up the side of the crib, came over the crib, over me, and I could smell this horrid smell. I don't know if it was its breath or what it was, but it was like putrid. And all of a sudden, it was lights out, and I'm being like strangled. I didn't feel hands around my throat or nothing, but I couldn't breathe. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't scream, and I couldn't breathe. And all I could do was move my arm, holding that teething ring, shaking the bars on the crib, and they would rattle and make a noise. And all of a sudden, the lights come on, and this thing just gone. And my father walked in now, so I must have been making more noise than I thought I was making, because his bedroom was a little bit further down in the house, and apparently he heard the shaking or the rattling of the crib. And of course, I started screaming and crying and everything, and it became a big mess because my father was mad. He was upset that he had to get up in the morning, and here I am waking him up at night. Now, between me and my brother Joe with his pins and needles monster, one of us was always waking somebody up from nightmares and that. And of course, they always called them night terrors in those days, but I wasn't sleeping. I was awake when this happened. My father tried to explain to me that, no one was there. I couldn't have seen a shadow man. If the lights were out, there couldn't have been a shadow. So he's hitting me with logic and common sense and everything. And eventually, I guess I bought it. I know my mother came in and she was, mothering me, and I was feeling better. And, next thing I know, I went back to sleep. But I always remembered that because I can still see it in my mind today. And since then, this same exact shadow figure has made its presence known to me numerous times, all of which are in the book, Stories Best Told in the Dark. So that's when I first saw the Shadow Man. That was the first haunting of any kind I had experienced. And again, it wasn't until later in life that I realized my brother Joe was experiencing the same thing. One other thing, I want to do one more quick story, and then I'll get back sometime next week with some more content. It was also back in around 1972 this happened. My grandparents were from Sicily. So we called them Nonni and Nonno. I guess that's Sicilian for grandmother and grandfather or something. My grandfather come from Patti in Sicily, and my grandmother come from Tindari. Both of them immigrated to this country. I think my grandfather was 21 at the time he came through Ellis Island into this country. Worked as a laborer on the railroad, and then eventually became a barber and cut hair the rest of his life, but very, very hard worker. He passed away, I think it was 1970 or 71. I think he was 83 when he died. And my grandmother lived upstairs from us. So that original house I talked about where I first saw the shadow man, we had to leave that house through a thing called eminent domain when they put in Route 95. They took our property, and so we got another house in the same city. And this was a 3-tenement house. And so my grandmother and grandfather had lived on the second floor, and we lived on the first floor. And above that was a full attic with dormers. You could pretty much live up there too, except there wasn't a bathroom up there. So my grandmother, as I recall, used to sit by herself after my grandfather passed away, and she would pray the rosary while watching TV. She'd watch To Tell the Truth and I Love Lucy and shows like that back in that time frame. And she would pray, and when she wasn't praying during the day, she was cooking, and she was a wonderful cook. But something really paranormal happened. In 1972, her health started failing. She went in the hospital. I went in to visit her. Now, in 1972, I think I was just turned 19, or I was 18. And I remember looking at her eyes, and they were they reminded me of the eyes of a fish when you catch a fish and it's not dead yet, but the eyes are all filmy and glossy looking. That's how she looked. And I kind of knew at that moment that my grandmother wasn't coming home. And she didn't. She passed away. And this happened after she passed away. So she passed away, and we had her funeral. And when that day was over, we were done, and we were talking about, okay, maybe my brother Joe and I would move up into her house now that it was empty and give my mother and father and my sister more room, whatever. And I remember it was 3 days. On the third day after my grandmother was buried, I believe it was the third day. It might have been the same day, but somehow I'm thinking 3. But after my grandmother was dead and buried, wake up one night and I can hear my grandmother upstairs. Now, she had a walker, and when she would walk across the floor upstairs, you could hear the walker pounding on the floor. Today they put like tennis balls on the bottom of it so it slides, but she would pick it up and put it down, pick it up and put it down. And I'm listening to this going across the floor over my head, and my brother Joe wakes up. He slept in the bed right next to me. He could hear it too. And then the light went on in my mother and father's room, and out comes my father, and he's like, do you hear that? And my sister comes out, so everybody's awake. Everybody heard it, and it was loud enough to wake everybody up. But there's nobody up there. Okay, that's now vacant. My grandmother's dead, and she's in the ground. So who's walking around upstairs? So after a little bit of discussion, my brother Joe, myself, and my father decide we're going to go up there, find out what's going on. And so we go up the flight of stairs to the second floor, and as we're getting closer to the kitchen door to go in, the walker that we're hearing going across the floor is also getting closer to the kitchen door. So it's like we're coming at the door from both sides, and we're all like apprehensive about what happens when we open the door. What's going to be there? The noise stops. My father unlocks the door, opens the door, turns on the light, and there's nobody there. Now, the strange thing was that we could smell my grandmother like she was right there. Her house had a very particular smell. She was always cooking. You always smelled garlic. And it hadn't been that long. But it was long enough because she had spent some time in the hospital before she passed away. And so that smell was as strong as if she was there right then and there. And I remember my father saying, "Oh, that's strange." And we said, "What?" Well, the walker was in the kitchen. Now, the walker was left in my grandmother's bedroom when she went to the hospital. How did it get in the kitchen? Well, as it turns out, for a number of days, maybe that's where I'm remembering 3 from. Maybe it was for 3 days this happened. I don't know. But for a period of time, every night we would wake up hearing my grandmother walking across the floor upstairs. And one of those nights, it was either my father or my brother Joe or somebody said, "You don't think this is her trying to let us know she's okay, do you?" And we kind of looked at each other and said, "Well, anything's possible, I guess." And that was the last time we ever heard it. So I think she was trying to let us know she was okay. So anyway, two short stories for tonight, but I will be back in a week or so with something I think you'll like. So until then, have a good night and see you all soon. Thank you.